This looks like a situation where an individual arrived at this scene to inflict maximum damage on individuals and to kill law enforcement.
Donald Trump has said immigration and customs enforcement agents will leave Minneapolis after clashes broke out following the shooting of a protester. The US president, though, did not give a timeline for the withdrawal of federal officers. Simon Marks is LBC's Washington correspondent. Do you think the president realises he's got a problem here, Simon? Hi.
Hi, Tom. I think he knows he's got a problem, but there's no indication that we're going to see an imminent departure from Minneapolis. He said eventually the operation would come to an end, but certainly he is aware that there is a rising chorus of criticism from within his own Republican Party about the cold-blooded killing of Alex Pretti on Saturday, a man who posed absolutely no threat whatsoever to the Border Patrol agents who disarmed him of the pistol that he was legally carrying, but absolutely not brandishing at them or threatening them with, and then fired 10 shots at him. Now, as for Kristi Noem, who we just heard from, the Secretary of Homeland Security, who, let me remind everyone, is only lying every time her lips move, the White House says today that the president, astonishingly, retains full confidence in her, even though last night he was telling the Wall Street Journal that he wanted to make sure that the government was reviewing everything that had taken place in Minneapolis on Saturday. And he said, I don't like it, of the shooting that had taken place of Mr. Pretti on the streets on Saturday. We've heard today from the swaggering head of the Border Patrol, Greg Bovino, a man who was taken to Minneapolis in recent days wearing SS-style full-length leather overcoats. He disclosed to reporters today, utterly stunningly, that the Border Patrol agents who killed Alex Pretti on Saturday are still on the streets and still at work.
All agents that were involved in that scene are working, not in Minneapolis, but in other locations. That's for their safety. There's this thing called doxing, and the safety of our employees is very important to us. So we're going to keep those employees safe. As far as the number of shots, the number of agents involved, that, again, is going to come out in the investigation.
Now, the president has announced that he's sending the zealous immigration czar of his, Tom Homan, to Minneapolis. Some think that that might be an effort to try and introduce a more moderate element to the conversation, although Mr. Homan is no moderate, really. This is a man who's threatened to arrest California Governor Gavin Newsom and the mayor of Los Angeles over their concern about ICE and Border Patrol operations in their cities. Last year. Meanwhile, the Republican backlash is growing. Chris Madel has been seeking the Republican Party's nomination to be the next governor of Minnesota.
I cannot support the National Republican's stated retribution on the citizens of our state, nor can I count myself a member of a party that would do so. I support the originally stated goals of Immigration's and Customs Enforcement's Operation Metro Surge in locating and deporting the worst of the worst from our state. And I've seen many examples of ICE arresting non-U.S. citizens in Minnesota convicted of serious crimes, including murder, rape, and child sexual assault. No reasonable person should want these people here, and I am glad that they are gone. But Operation Metro Surge has expanded far beyond its stated focus on true public safety threats. United States citizens, particularly those of color, live in fear. United States citizens are carrying papers to prove their citizenship. That's wrong. ICE has authorized its agents to raid homes using a civil warrant that need only be signed by a Border Patrol agent. That's unconstitutional and it's wrong.
There is also growing concern from Republicans in governors' mansions all over the country and from Republicans on Capitol Hill. And Tom, what happened in Minneapolis on Saturday, the killing of Alex Pretti, is almost certainly going to bring about another government shutdown here on Friday night, because Democrats who were before Saturday poised to back spending bills that included full funding for ICE operations, are now clearly no longer in a position where they politically can do that.
Another quiet week for you then, Simon, as you cover events from Washington, D.C. Thank you very much indeed for your time. An absolutely untenable situation continues in Minneapolis.
Let's talk now to Brian Bax, the political editor at Minnesota Public Radio. Brian, thank you very much for coming on the show. I've seen on social media former members of the American military and people on the right of politics suggesting that what's been going on in Minneapolis is not just spontaneous demonstrations, but a kind of organized insurrection against the federal government and ICE agents. What would be your reaction to that?
Well, if you watch some of the protests that have been happening around Minneapolis and the nearby areas for weeks, they've been largely peaceful. The images that are being projected on screen are, of course, of the clashes between federal agents and people who are upset about their presence here. But there were about 15 or 20,000 people who marched in Minneapolis on Friday, and it went off without a hitch. There, of course, like as you mentioned, there have been some cases where things have gotten out of hand. And right now, the Minnesota National Guard has been mobilized. There has been talk that the president of the United States might invoke the Insurrection Act. We haven't seen that yet, but things seem to be turning a corner today.
Just explain to people listening what you mean by that.
Well, for the first time, President Donald Trump has spoken by phone with Governor Tim Walz. There have been political adversaries for quite a while, and they both described the call in positive terms. The president said in his words that they seem to be on a similar wavelength, although he didn't get into what that was. The governor's readout of the call was that the president would be open to scaling down this few thousand agent presence here in Minnesota, and also be open to involving state investigators into the shooting death probes involving 2 Minnesota residents, 2 U.S. citizens who have been observers who were shot by federal authorities over the past few weeks.
Well, that's very important, a certain walking back from that. How has it felt in your state? Has it felt that in some sense you've been under siege?
It's been a couple of months of really hard pressure on state authorities here. Not only the immigration presence, but there have been multiple investigations into state spending and state federal grants that come to the state. There have been the governor himself had backtracked and decided not to run for re-election after he had been running for re-election. And keep in mind, Tim Walz is a national figure. He was the vice presidential candidate for Kamala Harris. So that was a pretty big deal in itself. But it's been a lot of tension, frustration, anger, and just concern about there seeming to be no end in sight. So people today might take some positive feelings out of the fact that at least leaders of opposing factions are now talking.
And Brian, do you believe that President Trump initially singled out the so-called refuge cities and parts of the country controlled by the Democrats for these operations?
Well, the president has talked in no uncertain terms that he's not a fan of the immigrant type populations that have been in Minnesota. Of course, a lot of the focus has been on Somali American people of Somali descent, and Minnesota has the largest presence of those folks of anywhere in the country. Most are U.S. citizens, I should mention. So it's just a matter of what the perception is. But the president has been seeing some erosion in support of this mission by people in his own party. And so things seem to have shifted, at least over the past few days, since that second shooting.